Today, I am going to continue talking about the practice of Lojong by Traleg Rinpoche. I'm starting out with slogan number 7, which is train in sending and taking alternately. These two should ride the breath. The Tibetan word for sending and taking is Tonglen. And this is a practice of relative bodhicitta. I've already talked about the absolute bodhicitta, and this is kind of underlaying or the foundation of relative bodhicitta. So ordinarily, we reject what we don't want and attach to what we do want. This is an obstacle, huge obstacle actually, to compassion and to traveling the path. Compassion turned inwards is renunciation of the causes of suffering, and the causes of suffering are rooted in actions that are motivated by attaching to what we find pleasant and wanting to get away from what we find unpleasant. So the Tonglen practice reverses this tendency. With this practice, we accept what we don't want and that we give away what we do want. And this is a practice in our mind. I'm not talking about going out on the street and giving away money to beggars, but it's a way of training our mind to be more generous, to be willing to actually give whatever is needed by sentient beings. It's a way of reducing our fear and anxiety about wanting to have what is pleasant and wanting to get away from what is unpleasant, and fear about letting go of wanting what is pleasant and so forth. So in a way, it's a way of developing courage to go beyond our ego, beyond our self-interest or our selfish interest. Actually, by doing this, we are going with what is in our own long-term interest. So this practice of Tonglen weakens and eventually removes our defensive point of view. It weakens our afflictive states of mind. So this is, again, as I said, a training in courage and a training in weakening our fear and our anxiety. Traleg Rinpoche quotes from the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva. And he has these quotes in there because he feels it's important to familiarize yourself with these quotes. You don't have to remember all of them, but it's good to refer back to them from time to time. So this is the quote: all suffering comes from the wish for yourself own happiness. Perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. Therefore, exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the practice of the Bodhisattvas. This self-obsession that we are trying to weaken includes feelings of inadequacy. We all have an inner critic that is telling us, among other things, that we're lacking this, we're lacking that, we need this, we're inadequate, we should have, would have, could have, and so forth. So Tonglen works on this inner critic and these feelings of inadequacy. This allows our mind to become more elevated and more expansive. It allows us to open up to new possibilities. It allows us to actually become master of our mind rather than being controlled by whims, urges, impulses, karma, habitual patterns, and so forth. So now the actual practice, to go into that, you would begin first by taking refuge. The 4 lines of the Chenrezig practice would be fine for doing that. And you could do it in English if you prefer. And in fact, the first 2 lines are taking refuge. The second 2 lines in the Chenrezig practice are about generating bodhicitta, this aspiration to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all. And it would be fine to do all 4 lines, quite honestly, because this is a practice in a relative bodhicitta. So then rest in the natural state briefly, then do the Vipassana exercises, which are slogans 2 through 6. When I say rest in the natural state, just meditate for a few minutes and then do the slogans and again rest in the natural state the best that you can. Then start doing the Tonglen within that state. So think of others in terms of their suffering, their undesirable experiences. Imagine the distress that others have from, and he has a number of things that are certainly sources of distress. Illness is one of them. The pain of a loss, and it could be a loss, the death of a partner, a child, a parent, a friend. It could be loss through a divorce, loss through losing your house for economic reasons or other reasons. That there are lots of things that we can lose and cause a lot of suffering. Then there is deprivation and the uncertainty of a deprivation. Am I going to have a meal tonight? Will I have a meal tomorrow? Will I be in my house tomorrow? I was surprised. Last week, I went to the acoustic cafe in Eau Claire, and there was a homeless man that was eating there in the cafe. I could tell because he had 2 large plastic sacks with him, and there were homeless people out on the street, both walking. The one was sleeping on a bench. Well, I've been to the acoustic cafe in the past and seen homeless people there too, but it just brought home that homelessness is not something happening somewhere else, that it's right here, right now. Then he mentions the confusion of mental illness. And this is one reason why people become homeless, is that they are unstable and cannot hold on to a steady job. And then finally, he talks about just plain strong conflicting emotions and how much suffering that can cause. So think about these things in others, and we can relate to a lot of these that we have experienced some of these ourselves, maybe not as strongly as other people have or intensely as other people have. Perhaps at the time we thought it was the most intense possible, that no one could have this more intensely than we're feeling this suffering. But if we really look around with clarity, we'll see that whatever difficulties and suffering we have had, that there are so many more people that have had a much worse experience than we have and are having right now. So the idea is to think about all of this suffering, and it's best to be very specific and visualize a particular person, and the traditional person used is your mother, because we tend to be, especially in Asia, close to our mother and want to reduce our mother's suffering and so forth. But for many people, they have a very poor relationship, a broken relationship with their mother. And we need to put somebody else in front to start with. This is a difficult practice, and we want to start it with a person that is easy to do this exchange. And it's perfectly acceptable to use a pet if you find that there isn't a person that you can really open up your heart to and accept their suffering. This follows the breath. So when we inhale physically, we imagine that we are inhaling the suffering from this being that we have compassion for. And on the out-breath, we imagine that our out-breath holds things that we hold dear. It can be special moments of happiness, special moments when you felt very secure, felt loved, when you felt at ease with yourselves, times when you felt good about money. Maybe now you feel good about money in terms of being in a comfortable place. Time when you were healthy, where your job was secure, your housing was secure. Think about these times that brought you happiness and then give them away on your out breath. Let the out breath symbolize giving these to the person that you are imagining freeing from suffering. So here, this mental act of giving is an act of love, wanting that person to be happy and to have the causes of happiness. And when you're inhaling and you are taking from them suffering and the causes of suffering, that is an action of compassion. So this is a practice of generating love and compassion for others. Again, when you're thinking about what causes happiness, we're talking about long-term happiness. It's fine to think about short-term happiness too, but realize that even if you would give that person a large amount of money, at some point the money would be gone. That it's not permanent. It just lasts for a certain amount of time. On the other hand, we can be very attached to money, and by mentally giving away money, it can actually be very powerful for us to learn to, you might say, loosen our grip on money and not be so attached to it. So this practice is literally training our mind. It's mind training. It's comparable to body training, to physical training, like lifting weights or walking or running, marathon running, and so forth, that we are training our mind to strengthen it. Just like when we're doing physical training, that we're training our body for endurance, for strength, and so forth. The problems that we have, the causes of suffering, or suffering is caused more by our thoughts and thinking about possible outcomes rather than what our actual experience is. An untrained mind becomes lazy. Any little bit of discomfort or unpleasantness is viewed as a problem, even perhaps dangerous. So Tralag Rinpoche quotes Shantideva. So I'll read that. To the extent this human form is cosseted and saved from hurt, just so, to that degree, it grows so sensitive and peevish. Well, I had to look up cosseted. It was defined as cared for and protected in an overindulgent way. I did not look for whether this comes from Australia, England, but I've never heard of this word before. So I suspect it has to do with his Australian English. Basically, it's saying that if we are overindulgent in protecting our physical form from hurt, we just get more sensitive. And the same thing with our mind. The more we try to protect our mind from discomfort and unpleasant things, the more sensitive we become. I remember years and years ago, I attended a wedding of a neighbor, and during the reception after the wedding, I met a man and was talking to him, and he was from Canada. And this was a long time ago. And he was saying how much he likes driving in the United States, because in the United States, they have these cameras and they will sense a car in the left turn lane and they will turn the left turn light on for you. And in Canada, you have to wait and wait and wait. And that's what is being talked about here, how these little things can become so irritating. And in the bigger picture, it's really not a big deal. It's not even a little deal. So with the Tonglen practice, we are developing courage, we're developing determination, we're strengthening our mind. And Tralek Rinpoche felt that the samsaric mind is very weak and it's very wild and very easily perturbed, and you might say driven wild. What comes to mind is one time I stayed overnight giving a program there overnight in this house that belonged to one of the members, and they had a dog. The dog was a very nice house dog, stayed in the house. There was a big patio door that looked outside, of course, and there was a squirrel that lived on the other side of that door. The owner called the squirrel Mayhem because the squirrel would purposely stand in front of that door and tease the dog. And the dog would go wild, jumping all over the place, barking, just kicking up a fuss and making it kind of miserable for everybody. And I think that's a great example of samsaric mind. Losing your self-control and making yourself miserable, accomplishing little or nothing. The squirrel would come back the next day and do the same thing. So here are some incorrect thoughts, or thoughts that are problematic for Tonglen. The first is, I'll get sick, or I'll invite suffering. And you can't. You cannot take on another person's suffering unless you are on the bodhisattva levels. And if you're on the bodhisattva levels, you will do it willingly. You'll know that you are doing it willingly. I remember Rinpoche talking about this and said, unless you're on a bodhisattva level, you cannot take on the illness of another person. And he told this story about a bodhisattva that could do this. This happened, of course, in old Tibet, and this nomad had a herd of yaks, and yaks are actually the male, dri are the females, and his herd had an intestinal infection where they were in very poor shape and in danger of dying. I know here with the dairy farmers, there is an intestinal disease that cows get called scours, and it is deadly if it's not treated. Whether this was scours or something like it, I don't know. But anyway, the animals were in very poor health and in danger of dying. And the nomad went to this great Lama and requested that he come and pray for them to get better. So the Lama came with an attendant, and they built a fire, and the Lama never said any prayers. He just sat by the fire and every once in a while threw a stick into the fire to keep it burning. And then after a while, he and his attendant went home. Well, this left the nomad just wondering, what the heck? Well, the nomad came back to the monastery the next day and thanked the Lama and said that his herd was better. And he was very grateful, made an offering and so forth. Then later on, the attendant said, well, what did you do? The Lama said, well, I did Tonglen. The Lama said, well, when I got up this morning, I did have a bout of diarrhea, but that was no problem. So yes, a bodhisattva can do that, and doing it willingly. But you don't have to worry about that. The next obstacle or incorrect way to look at this is, I'll be miserable if I take on all these negative thoughts, all this suffering. I can't hardly handle my own suffering. The error of this is that we are inhaling it and it vanishes into emptiness. We're visualizing inhaling it. It's just a visualization. It's not the actual suffering that we are inhaling. We're imagining it. It's our imagination. And so, we're imagining it going into our lungs. Since it's just emptiness and appearance, it vanishes into emptiness. Our lungs are not like a vacuum cleaner bag that collects all of this And then eventually the vacuum cleaner bag gets full. So that is an incorrect approach. A third one is thinking that I don't have much love to give. I don't have much compassion. And this is thinking that this is like a zero-sum game, that there is only so much and you can only give so much and you can only take so much. So here is a long quote from Tralek Rinpoche that I really like. We feel nurtured when we are nurturing. Only a nurturing person can nurture, and a nurturing person is nurtured by his or her own caring attitudes. If you can develop these qualities, you will no longer have to go around like a sponge, soaking up the drops of love others leave behind. So what we're doing with this practice is we're actually nurturing ourselves. We're nurturing our love and compassion. We are growing it. We're increasing it. And eventually, it increases to the point where you realize that it is a limitless resource. It's impossible to run out of love or run out of compassion. The Dalai Lama has said that a candle can light 1,000 candles and never be diminished. So when we give love, when we give compassion, we're not losing anything. The fourth one is to think that Buddhas have gone beyond suffering, so how in the heck can they share or understand the suffering that we ordinary beings have? How can they share in this suffering? And of course, the Buddhas have past lives. They know their past lives, that they know they've gone through a lot of suffering in their past lives, and they've transcended it. They also are clairvoyant, and they know what's going on in the minds of confused sentient beings. They have a lot of mental clarity. They see beyond the subject-object confusion that we see. What happens with us is when we see a suffering being, we frequently mix that compassion with pity. It can become a trigger, as in having past trauma, a trigger that triggers trauma. It can be mixed with guilt, could be mixed with feeling helpless. There could be a feeling of being victimized, and all kinds of other things that just cloud the whole situation. And all of these are missing in the mind of a Buddha or a bodhisattva. The main point is that this training is working towards the transcendence of suffering. Suffering is a combination of actual pain and difficulty, and then attempting to avoid it. The pain is unavoidable, the suffering is optional. Again, nothing is actually given away, nothing is actually being taken when we're doing Tonglen. It's our imagination. We are working on being not afraid to take on negativity and suffering and so forth. We're working on becoming not afraid to send out love, to give things that cause happiness, to give things that we usually attach to that will cause happiness in others. And we're training ourselves to feel strong enough to be able to help them and be willing to help them in either giving them things that will cause happiness or taking away what will cause suffering. Now, because of interdependence, even though this practice is mental and we're working with our own mind, our own thoughts and attitudes and so forth, this will influence others. Just because of interdependence, our state of mind, it can influence other people. Our body language, a smile, a look, and so forth. This influences other people. And as we train our mind and become more open, we reduce the negative and increase the positive in our minds and our attitude. This will have a benefit for other people. Now, if there's no physical contact, he says, well, maybe so, maybe not. But you're definitely going to be benefiting yourself, and you will be benefiting those people that you come in contact with. On the other hand, don't expect this to fix the world problems, he says, that this is about personal transformation. It's about going beyond our ego games, and so forth. He says there are signs to look for that indicate that it's working. And that is problems that may seem overwhelming when you begin over time will diminish and eventually cease to matter. Smaller problems become no problem. You'll develop more gratitude towards others. You will have others as an opportunity to develop. And gradually you'll realize that you are the real beneficiaries of the Tonglen practice. In post-meditation, this is after you are done with the Tonglen practice, first of all, then return to shamatha meditation for a little while. The reason is that Tonglen can agitate the mind. So we start out in shamatha meditation to calm the mind down. Then after we do a session of Tonglen, we do more shamatha, calm the mind down again. And then we get up from our practice and go into the mundane world and our mundane life. Now here, awareness is important. He makes a distinction between self-awareness and awareness. Self-awareness is from the point of ego. It's about opinions, viewpoints, and so forth. And awareness is just noticing without ego being the center. I like to use the word a drone view, a drone with a camera, where you get an aerial view, you see a bigger picture. Instead of being part of what's going on, you get to look at it from a certain distance. And you see that besides what is going on, that there's a lot else that is going on. Again, this helps you see that your difficulties and your problems and so forth are part of the picture, but they're not the full picture. Then comes the aspirations, and aspirations are extremely important in Mahayana Buddhism. The aspirations are a combination of positive intentions and practices. Bring these intentions about. We accumulate merit, good karma. What happens or the result of our good karma and merit is not the result of a higher power. It's not even the result of a Buddha. It is the accumulation of our own actions, mental, physical, actions of speech. To sum it up, don't sell yourself short. We have a lot of personal power and ability, and this is intended to develop these. Now, the next three slogans are to help us maintain our awareness in post-meditation activities. The first one is 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 seeds of virtue. To start out with, Trungpa Rinpoche says that we tend to group people into 3 categories in our daily life. 1, those we get along with, have our types of opinions and our point of view. Those who we don't get along with have a different opinion. And those who we have no real interest in and have, you might say, no opinion of. You don't even know what their opinion is. We don't really care. So the first group of people, we can have a lot of attachment, love, affection, compassion for. The second group, scorn and condemnation. We can revile them, in his words, say a lot of negative things towards these people, view them as the enemy. The third group is the majority of people, and we just don't have much of an opinion or have a feeling of indifference. There is this potential from this group for attachment or aversion. They could be at some point, being in this group could be in number one or number two, but at the present time, it's just, you might say, potential. Now, the thing is that our feelings towards a person, whether it be attachment, aversion, or indifference, can change in less than a minute. If you're in a relationship with a partner, maybe a live-in relationship, in the morning, you love them, you have a disagreement in the afternoon, that evening, there's the silent treatment. Next day, you're in bed making up. That's the way our minds work. So this is the three objects, these three groups of people. The three poisons are our desire, our anger, and our ignorance. The three virtues are non-desire, non-anger, and non-ignorance. And seeds are the possibility of growth, the possibility of transformation. So this slogan is saying that we can use our negative tendencies, our negative habits to grow and transform. This is about our relationships and our viewpoints. Things are not solid. Things can change. Someone can be a friend, a foe, a stranger, and it's a result of a variety of causes and conditions, circumstances, and so forth. You can realize you overreacted to the words of a friend or another person. You can look with suspicion, or you might think they're looking at you with suspicion. You have good days and bad days. Other people have good days and bad days. You find out a friend of yours is a Trump supporter, and now you're enemies, or you might find that they're not a Trump supporter and now you're enemies. The point is to have this dream-like quality that comes from the slogans 2 through 6. The sixth one is in post-meditation, be a child of illusion. So have this dream-like quality. We think things are solid, that we understand how things are and they don't change, or they change slowly. But this is absolutely not true. Things aren't fixed. People aren't fixed. With this panoramic drone view per perspective, we see these things more clearly. We can grow from these difficulties and difficult people. We can realize we're more capable than we thought of working with these kinds of difficult situations. Very simply, we don't develop virtues unless we have vices. We don't develop patience unless we find ourselves in situations where we need patience. So this meditation on absolute bodhicitta is the foundation for these practices of relative bodhicitta in the samsaric world. We can have very strong ideas about who we are and who other people are. And again, this solidifies things. We might think that I am the way I am because of something that I experienced when I was growing up or earlier in my life. And since that can't change, I can't change. This is who I am. But all of this is just an illusion. It's a fabrication. This is how we solidify things. It's like taking a photograph of a waterfall. The photograph is not the waterfall. It's just an instant in time. I was thinking about this comparison. We can fool ourselves by thinking, well, yes, change happens, and it happens in a regular, predictable way. Let's say you buy a new car and you go to Consumer Reports and you buy their number one rated car being maintenance free. So you're thinking all I have to do is change the oil when the change oil light goes on, and have regular maintenance when that light goes on, and I put in new brakes and new tires when necessary. And then when I get about 250,000 plus miles, I'll sell it. If you've ever owned a car, unexpected problems arise. And then when that happens, since it was unexpected, you get upset. This isn't supposed to be happening. I know an experience that I have had is that as soon as the manufacturer warranty expires, bang, there's a problem that would have been covered by the warranty, but it's no longer covered. This is the way life is. I don't care what aspect of life you look at. Our plans are nothing but plans, well thought out fantasies. And we have to realize that life is fluid, interdependent, causes and conditions. And that's the way it is. But that also means that we can change our attitude, we can change our behavior, our outlook, we can transform ourselves, we can become better people. So in post-meditation, we're advised to do this. When desire arises, recall what you've experienced in the past. When excessive desire or anger or any other excessive emotion has arisen and we've attached to it, think of the problems and pain that resulted, and imagine that you are soaking up this excessive desire from others. May this desire of mine that has just arisen embody the desire of all sentient beings. May they be free of this desire and the pain that it can cause. So this is very beneficial. And at this point, I'm going to open it up. So slogan number 9 is use sayings to train in all forms of activity. The Kadampas, and that is where these slogans of mind training came from. They specialized in all kinds of sayings, training the mind through sayings. And the 7 points of mind training is just one of their systems of sayings that they used. These short sayings are pithy, and they direct our mind in a positive way. It's good to memorize as many as you can. And he says that these 59 are only a beginning. So do the best that you can. Jamgon Kongtrul wrote a great book on these slogans of mind training. It's called The Great Path of Awakening. And this would have been written in the latter part of the 19th century. He is quoted here writing, "While their evil ripens in me, may all my virtue ripen in them." So we're advised to go beyond just parroting these slogans, that we use them to bring about real fundamental change in our outlook, our state of mind. And these slogans have power if we apply them with confidence. What came to my mind was The Red Green Show, which is a Canadian comedy. And it took place at a man's lodge in some mythical place in Canada. But it was a comedy about men and male behavior. Every program ended with a lodge meeting, and they repeated the man's prayer. And if I remember correctly, it went, "I'm a man, I can change. If I have to, I guess." So if we take an attitude like that, there's no confidence and nothing's going to happen. It's good to remind yourself of your bodhisattva vow. And if you haven't taken it, then have the aspiration to take your bodhisattva vow. And to remember that you don't have to react in your usual way, that you can develop some freedom. And again, try to apply these slogans throughout your daily life. Bring them to mind. He talks about rejoicing, that this slogan is about rejoicing. We tend to over-focus on bad news and negative things. When something good happens to someone else, We can become envious or jealous or develop some other negative feelings towards the good fortune of other people. So these slogans help us work with the good fortune of other people and our own state of mind. So simply rejoice in the good fortune of others. We just add to our misery by negative reactions to the happiness of other people. He uses examples of someone's beauty reminds us of our own ugliness, or someone's wealth reminds us of our poverty, or someone's successful children remind us of our own child's bad grades or bad behavior, and so forth. But we can change these reactions. We can transform them to positive ones and rejoice in the good fortune of other people and share their happiness. It's pointless to wallow in unhappiness unless you want to be unhappy. And that just is a contradiction of our basic impulse to be happy and to avoid suffering. It's good to think about that when you are feeling unhappy and wallowing in it. It's like, what's the point? Don't you want to be happy? So we and the other person can benefit from us rejoicing in their good fortune, their good situation. On the Mahayana path, our motivation and our thoughts are actually more important than external actions and deeds, because we are accumulating karma and karmic imprints. Tralek Rinpoche says we become what we think and we think what we become. He encourages us to memorize and then apply them automatically. And this can turn the subconscious gossip churning around in our mind from negative to positive. So these exercises in Lojong are an antidote to the defeatist habit. And transformation comes from learning to think about things differently, having the courage to think about things differently. What the samsaric response is to suffering is that if I just change the circumstances, things are going to be different. And of course, you change the circumstances, but your habitual patterns, your way of thinking, your way of responding has not changed. And you find yourself in the same place over and over and over again. And you wonder, how come I'm back here?